Hey Bruce, hi Brad, hi Nate.
Jesse,
How you doing?
better by the moment.
Yeah, sounds like flu. That's too bad.
Hmm.
I've been fortunate to avoid, knock on wood. Let's see.
Hmm.
We'll wait a minute to see if Angus is coming.
Yeah, Angus emailed said he would join. I'm actually feeling a bit under the weather today, so I think
Sorry.
I'll blame my kids.
Yeah, well that's a given. I mean, just like when people first go to college, like both my kids got sick a lot the first semester. It's just all the new germs from new people at once.
Yeah, I was at a swim meet this past weekend with over, probably like 1,500 people.
Wow.
I think it was that.
That's big. Is that like a statewide meet then?
It was like I don't know what it was. I think it was like considered like a finals meet
Yeah,
for swim teams. It wasn't high school, but I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but
got it. Hi Angus.
Hey, how's everyone doing? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everyone.
Yep, to all too.
All right, let me get my screen organized and then we can get started. There we go. Okay, I think my host or you still host, Nate?
I made you co-host, Jesse, I believe.
There we go. Oh, but I don't have the start meeting button.
Right. Oh, it's already started. So just
Oh, okay. Got it. Great. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the subcommittee on zoning and housing of the Amherst Planning Board. It is January 15th, 2026. We're getting started at 11:32 a.m. We will start with just a roll call vote. So please let me know if you're here. Bruce Coldham,
Yeah.
Fred Hartwell,
Here.
Angus McLeod,
Here.
and I, Jesse Major, am here as well. Great. I see no one in the audience presently. I will try and keep an eye on that if anyone shows up. On our agenda today, first was announcements. I had one before we talk about other things, which is just that I'm a bit overwhelmed at work lately, still catching up from some things. And I was wondering if anyone else was interested in chairing this subcommittee, even if just temporarily for a month or two. I'm just feeling like I'm constantly underwater and not having time to think about this appropriately. Uh, Happy to participate, I'll still come. It's getting a little more challenging for me to block the times during the day, but I think I can effectively do that. I just feel like I'm being a bad leader of this group recently. So if anyone else has that kind of energy, I'd be happy to trade off for a bit. Don't have to decide right now, but if you want to think about it, that's fine too. I'm not looking at you, Angus, not at all.
Hmm.
Right. Anyway, just to put that out there, I think we're still progressing things, but I feel like I could be giving more thought and attention to things. So, is what it is.
Yeah. I've got a lot of things that I'm trying to do on this committee. I don't know that equates to chairmanship or not. That doesn't hasn't occurred to me. I've just got some things that I'm pushing, and also I'll certainly keep doing that. And that
Okay.
whether that translates into taking over from you for a while or not, I don't know. But
Okay. Like I said, I'm still planning to show up. I just
yeah,
don't know how much outside time I have to give a lot of thought. That's what I'm
yeah,
expressing. I wish I did, and I hope it'll come back in a little bit, but that's fine. And Bruce, you're currently vice chair anyway, so
yes,
if I just
yes,
don't show up, you have to do it.
yeah. It's true. That's okay. And what would distract me would be making minutes.
Right. So that's really the only extra task, and I'm
Yeah.
behind on that, which is the next topic. So
Because
nothing to approve.
I'm trying to make minutes in a different form.
Right. And so I mean, to be honest, if you read the minutes that I have put together, I use AI to do minutes and then just sort of go through and correct things, and it's actually pretty good.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's quite thorough, and mostly just correcting names and spellings and stuff like that, and occasionally like the meaning of something gets translated poorly, but it's not a huge
Can
lift.
people hear that phone ringing on in my end?
No.
Good. Okay, I'll let go. It's not mine. It's
Okay.
a visitor who's left their bag on the table downstairs and
Got it.
doesn't realize their phone's ringing. I
So
don't care. Good.
anyway, food for thought. Let's just proceed. No minutes. I didn't share any minutes. Again, I'll hopefully get a couple around for next time we meet, or at least get them to Nate to upload in draft form like we have been doing, and then approve at some point. Actually, I think there are still a bunch still just draft form. So I'll look at that again and see what we actually have to approve.
Yeah, and I owe a set from the other meeting in December. I can get those working on.
That'd be great. Okay. The other thing related to what I just raised, I also just wanted to thank you, Nate, for really also helping us drive this bus, because we, you know, you're really putting together the agendas and helping us think about what we should think about. So that's fantastic. All right, we'll just get to it. First on our list was continued discussion of cottage style subdivision, or 40Y. And I know, Bruce, you had some big thoughts about this. Maybe you want to start the conversation about.
Yes, yeah, I could start at the two levels. One, of course, is that I mean, where we left off was thinking about the 40Y last time. Angus had read through it, you had, Nate had, and I'd read through your reports and a little bit of the 40Y thing itself, and we concluded that it was a little cumbersome for various reasons. And the thought was, what is the benefit of the state? And could we not bypass that and create our own piece? And that's where we left off. And I thought more about that. And then I thought, actually, that seems like a really good idea to me. And so I wrote something. And the thought that occurred to me, I think, following that meeting was that we already have a version of this in a way through the farmland protection overlay. Recall, well, you may not, but that was put in place in the late 90s. And the first parcel off the rank, Fred and I happened to be on the planning board at the time, 25 years ago. It was not certain at the town that the bylaw would stand the test of actually the town, forcing the requirements of this bylaw onto an aspirant developer, which in that case was Jones Patterson. I think, yes, for the Barkowski parcel, which is actually quite near me. And it turned out that after a year and a half of process and so forth, that the board did make a determination that was around that farmland protection overlay, and it wasn't contested in land court. If it was done. It wasn't in court. It was done on the basis of opinions and so forth, but it held up. And I thought that we could contemplate something similar. And so that's what I wrote in that parcel. And essentially, it's whereas the farmland protection overlay was saying it was forcing the development to apportion a third or so of a developable lot. It was taking the development entitlement and squeezing it and obligating the developer to use the zoning, the cluster bylaw. And that's what happened here, and we had so what was created in that subdivision was much smaller lots than would normally be included, and the rest, 2/3 of the land, have been left um, open. In our case, we would be opposing the opportunity of smaller lots, not requiring that they be condensed, but I say allowing a threefold increase in the density. But in return for that, expecting that there is a minimum house size described by envelope. I guess it could be done by envelope or by square footage or by both. But that's the essence of 40Y, is to create smaller houses. And the experience of the Coles project at Coles Lane, about the Jones Patterson developers, was that they built houses more or less the same size up on Coles Lane on these much smaller lots. And so the question is, can we, as we allow many more, a threefold increase in the allowable number of lots on a given subdivision, could we at the same time limit the size of the house? And would that be considered a taking, or whatever the term is, or would it be considered a fair trade in the sense that the zoning, the provision of this cottage style for subdivisional overlay would allow 3 times the number of lots, and therefore in return you build smaller houses, and then that I think necessarily creates affordable houses. And this is obviously not a student housing intention, it's a workforce housing intention, and I think this would be a very nice complement to our efforts to create more dedicated places at higher densities for students, and putting the two together, or promulgating, putting them out together indicates that there's a balanced approach that the board has, and we're not just seeing blinkered student housing.
Yeah.
So that's what I wrote.
I think it's a great idea. I have a couple thoughts, some of which I think have come up in conversation before. One is, how do we make sure it's not just more student housing? I think you've offered in the past, well, if you put it in certain places that are less desirable, it potentially would not necessarily be built to rent. I'm not convinced that works given what I see around town, but it might. The other thing I'm wondering is there a way we can build in some owner occupancy requirement if you're going to have this ability? The third thing I'm wondering is, rather than overlay, can it just be a zoning change to say, yeah, you can do this scheme of smaller square footage required, but you have to meet these other requirements, rather than specify certain places? Because maybe that would be okay for some spots that are suitable for student housing. I don't know. Maybe that's a way for us to also get more density in the places we're thinking about already. I mean, I totally agree with the intention of what you're saying, Bruce, which is we want to make opportunity for workforce, young family, whatever housing. Those are the issues I see right away.
Okay.
Nate, do you know, can we do on the owner occupancy piece? Is that something we can do? Can we say, okay, if you're going to have smaller lot sizes, half of them need to be owner occupied?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. Typically with single family homes, we couldn't kind of have that condition. But it's interesting if it's like one, I see this as a development method, right? It could be similar to like cluster or open space. And so, I think that we'd still be allowing all these other things and single family home development in a zoning district or on the property, just not at the density. And so I feel like maybe we could, try it, right? I feel like we could maybe even have inclusionary zoning apply and have it go up to 150% AMI on some units. And so there's probably a few different things to think about. Yeah, I like this. And so, I was thinking maybe we'd call it a traditional neighborhood subdivision, only because in the housing production plan, there's a cottage style development, which is more like, multiple units on a single property that may or may not be fee simple or with a subdivision road, but just, multiple dwellings. And so, but I like this concept. And so, I think what's nice about 40Y, what we discussed last time, right, is that it actually has a size limit and bedroom size count in the regulations, which typical zoning doesn't. And so, yeah, I talked to the building commissioner and other staff, and everyone kind of likes this idea. It's just then how do you kind of get to where what we might envision, right? So if we allow 0 lot lines in some instances, and depending on our setbacks, would we still get one big unit, or can we build in some kind of, some of the setbacks and dimensional standards to get, a range of unit sizes or types or something? I don't, I mean, sometimes I look at this as doing like a 5,000 square foot lots, right? 50 by 100.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what this calls for. And I think some of it is actually appropriate because I think the development costs are so high. Either the development would be a traditional subdivision with really big homes, so the price of the homes, substantiates that investment in infrastructure, roadways, public water, sewer, whatever they might do, or you get more units in a narrower road that then can still, justify all that expense of doing that kind of subdivision. And so, I think it's something that we can look at. And I just sent that article around about, the smaller lots. So I think people are really thinking about it. I agree. There's, considerations. I'm not, I feel like we just have to maybe just put something down and, bring it to the planning board in a few weeks and
Yeah, I agree.
see where it goes.
And what do you think about the zoning change versus overlay idea?
Yeah, Jeff, the new director of planning and economic development, and I met with Doug, and we talked about, Jeff's coming to the planning board next week and kind of talking about priorities for the next year for the town and the board and the departments. And, Doug's like, he's like, I'd love to simplify the zoning, and overlay sometimes seems like they complicate zoning. I guess it's perception.
Yeah.
So I don't know, when you were talking, Bruce and Jesse, when you were talking, I'm like, okay, well, if we had certain criteria, and he said this last time, is there minimum criteria in terms of how this is, or where this could be used? Lot size, water, sewer, public water, public sewer, I don't know. And there's a few things, and then we just say, we allow this development method in these zones. It could be RO, RLD, RN, whatever. Then that might be one approach, right? Because it can't happen everywhere. And the other option we had talked about was if we had this criteria, would we then just create an overlay over some of the properties that meet the criteria? So, I mean, it kind of does the same thing. It's just the different kind of approach.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the perception and also just, yeah. So when someone, yeah, just a perception issue as maybe being better and a wider applicability, because maybe there's someone in a neighborhood who has a big lot who decides they want to develop it as small lots. Then we don't have to the piece.
I hadn't considered that, but I kind of like that approach. And I guess we just have to figure out then, where.
Yeah. Fred, go ahead. You had your hand up.
Yeah, I think a question has to be asked. I think it's this approach has a lot of promise. Would the state law on accessory dwellings apply to this? Would we end up with ADUs on this?
We could.
And so that would add another layer to this that we couldn't really control.
Yeah, but if we design it right, that might be fine. I mean, it's just more density, right? I mean, that's part of what we're saying.
Okay.
But then the problem is, I think you're saying then we have one lot becomes 3 lots, and then suddenly there's 6 units on it instead of 3 that we intended.
On the other hand, that in terms of economics, it's another way to increase affordability of the principal unit.
Yeah.
Water, sewer, is important. So, if this were on septic, the distance between septic and well, creates a situation where you'd almost have to do a common, treatment, and you couldn't do individual. So, so maybe in some parts of town, if this applied and someone is willing to do that, they may only be able to get single family homes. In other parts where there's, public utilities, maybe they could do ADUs more easily. But
Yeah.
I think it's
maybe that's
out
okay.
there.
Right? If we think that through, maybe that's actually totally fine, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Angus, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I really like the idea that you and Nate were discussing about not so much doing an overlay, which I feel like would require a lot of like maintenance and thinking about actual parcels or kind of discrete areas, but thinking more about the zones, like thinking about RLD, RO, RN, which are also the areas that we're not targeting for as much housing changes. And as someone who lives in one of those areas, I think it'd be great to try and think about ways to allow for greater density in them. And I think there's a lot of land there that's ripe for this. I think thinking about sewage and other services is really important, but I really like that idea, and I think it would make it easier to. It would give people more flexibility and to give developers more flexibility, and would not put as much on us in terms of like identifying discrete parcels, which I think would be good, and future like planning boards.
Yeah. Bruce, go ahead.
Maybe well, I'll let others figure out whether it's works better as a general zoning change as opposed to an overlay. I saw this as a subdivision, and so and I would put my hand up to speak to the owner occupancy fraction of this. Because I think the way I imagined this would happen would be that it would be someone would identify a substantial parcel, they would subdivide it, and then the lots would be sold by the subdivision developer, who may or may not put any of their own houses up, but basically the housing would be put up one at a time, more or less. And so I just wanted to say that I'm assuming that will be the way in which this sort of thing will mature. And then if that's correct, then we have to think, well, how do we apply the various other requirements we might have about inclusionary zoning and owner occupancy and so forth. I just want to make sure that we're not necessarily assuming that this is one single development initiative. I certainly had not imagined that it would be that. Right. So I just thought I'd check in to see whether anybody else is, whether that's the general assumption that this would be a subdivision and that it would proceed as subdivisions do.
I think it kind of gives, in the zoning change idea, it gives all that flexibility. It could play out the way you just described, or it could also play out that one developer does build all the houses, right?
Well, it could either way with an overlay and so forth. I mean, somebody
I guess that's
to do.
Yeah.
Another thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was another thought that I had as I was putting this together, and been thinking generally about our conversations, is that I want to ask a general question about how thoroughly do we as a planning board, I guess, so this is we as a subcommittee of the planning board advising or counseling the planning board, and maybe staff, how thoroughly do we need to put together a proposal before we submit it to the town council? Now I'm thinking back how much time and effort we put into the U Drive, and then we just kept on doing it as it came back from the town council and came back to us and so forth. By contrast, I see the two petitioner articles for zoning changes that were submitted by Kitty and Darcy. They went to council. Council deliberated on them and then sent them back to us. it seemed to me that it's pretty clear that you don't have to have stuff sorted out entirely in order to submit something for review by council to then have it sent back. Now that what Kitty and Darcy sent wasn't fully developed, but was developed enough for council to think, yes, we should formally engage the planning board on a public hearing to and the CRC to engage in public hearings to evaluate this. So I'm thinking, if we want to use our resources to the best effect, maybe we should hold back on completely or trying to do a thorough job on the first round, and that maybe something like I've just written with a few more criteria attached to it, perhaps, and some dimensional, so some particular dimensional standards or things put into it in a narrative form, but we submit it in a narrative form, much like has been done. In other words, do we need to do a whole lot more before we would submit this idea here to the to council, and similarly with regard to the North Amherst overlay?
Yeah.
I'm thinking that we should perhaps lower our bar a little, since we only want to.
There's, in my mind, there's a little risk, and I have one question for Nate, more of a procedural question in the town. So what happens if something goes to the council and they just say, no way, we're not interested? We as a planning board, I assume, can still work on it and send something else back, right? There's no risk that they're going to be like, nope, can't work on that.
Yeah.
And the follow-up thought is there's still a risk of that happening and setting the negative counselors deciding they're already not interested. So that then no matter how much work we do on it, that'll be the immediate response. But in general, I agree with you, Bruce. I'm just want to flesh that out a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah, Angus, I see your hand. I think we should get things into a zoning bylaw format. So I think the citizen petitions were too generic, and so just inform to me that, I think we've had some opinion from from KP Law, the town's attorney, legal counsel, who said the way Master General Law is written, it's pretty vague on what happens when something gets, is sponsored, whether it's a citizen petition or brought forward by the planning board or others, and what does that, the town council need to do with it. But I think they've been, informed that they don't actually have to do anything with it. They can just let it sit. They don't have to refer it. And then essentially it just, the time expires and then it can't move forward. And they didn't really have that legal opinion when these citizen petitions first came forward. So I agree with Bruce. I think that, but I do think we should get something in the zoning form. And so what I was going to say is, I think at the next week at the planning board meeting, and I've been talking with staff, I've said this before, I think we wanted to kind of narrow it down and say, let's identify 4 to 7 zoning amendments between staff and the planning board that we'd want to work on and get to town council, say, by May, and or something. Give ourselves a good deadline, and this might be one of them. And so I think what we'd want to do as a subcommittee and with the planning board is just start getting a format down, and we might not be able to answer all of the questions, right? So we might not be able to answer the owner occupancy piece, right? But we can get the zoning article into a format that we can bring to council with these other considerations or factors, because then it just comes back to the planning board and CRC. And so I don't think we need to spend a year talking about this subdivision method or whatever we want to call it, if we think we can really focus on it in 3 months and get something in a good format, because there'll always be other ideas. And so that's, yeah, I think University Drive, in the end it worked out, but it did take a long time. And I think some of it was how the CRC and others were brought into it. And so, we as staff have talked about, if we identify these number of priorities that the planning board and subcommittee might be looking at, do we just go to CRC and preview it with them before it goes to council, just so they're not, they haven't heard about it, and give them the opportunity to start looking at it too, or, before it becomes an official zoning amendment, right? So if it goes to council and they refer it back, then it's actually the official zoning amendment. Until then, it's a possible zoning amendment, right? It's an idea, it's a concept. And so what happened with University Drive, they heard about it, but I don't think they actually really, really read it and then took it seriously because it hadn't been referred to them. But maybe with some of these ideas, it'd be good to bring them along during the conversation. So, we've been talking about it for a few months. It goes to council, it comes back, and the planning board is like, oh, we've already talked about this a little bit. We can do this pretty quickly. And then the CRC or others might be like, wow, it's going to take us 6 months because we haven't heard it. So
Yeah, no, that's a good thing.
I don't know the right answer. I don't want to I don't think we should go with just a narrative and a few bullet points. I think we should actually try to structure it as like a bylaw format. And maybe there's, we have questions within that, right? Like things to consider, and we list them, but at least we get it pretty close.
Okay. Okay. That's good.
Great. I propose we use this as a first example to try and be nimble. Angus, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the question that it raises for me, and this is maybe a question for Bruce, since this is kind of, I don't want to say your baby, Bruce, but it's the thing you're taking initiative on, which I love. I guess I'm wondering, one of the parts of the housing production plan talks about, I think it's like fifth strategy. It says amend the cluster development method to increase subdivision density and flexibility. And so I guess I'm wondering, could we just if we're trying to think about where to place this, right, as an overlay, as a change to, general zoning, could we make this essentially a major change to cluster development? I'm looking on the zoning bylaw on pages like 51 and 52. It has dimensional regulations for cluster developments in RLD, RO, RN, RVC. The minimum lot size in RVC is 7,500 square feet for a cluster development. And for RLD, it's 25,000 square feet. So pretty big. I mean, 7,500 is smaller, a lot smaller than general dimensional regulations, but still way bigger than 5,000. So I guess I'm wondering, could we funnel this into reconfiguring the cluster development method, which I haven't read that closely, so I don't know how much. That sounds like a lot of changes, but it would potentially bring down the cluster abilities, and the cluster ability is already kind of targeted in different ways to different districts. We could lower them all, but maybe not make them all the same. I don't know. It's just one thought or question, I guess, for Bruce or for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I like that because it's back to this broader change, more flexibility. I wonder if there's room or format in the bylaw to be like option A on cluster development, option B on cluster development. So whatever's in there could stand, but then it could be like, okay, and if you want to get to 5,000, here are the other requirements that you need to meet. House size, owner occupancy, whatever. Yeah, I think that's good thinking. Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that's let's maybe look at that, right, as a could it be modified? I think, essentially that's what we're doing. And, part of the agenda and what we're talking about as the planning board is how do we implement the housing production plan? And, I think this subdivision, this development method we're talking about does what you said, Angus, what the plan says. And, it's interesting to me, cluster is a term that's been around. And so sometimes, if we change it to something new, like Bruce had said, if we then it means something different. And so to me, it's like, oh, well, maybe, cluster is outdated. Maybe we actually want to call this, we use the cluster, we keep the same formatting, same section of bylaw, but now we call it, something different, traditional neighborhood subdivision or traditional neighborhood development. And we use that framework and we modify right where we need to, but maybe, half of what's there or more than half stays. And then, we try to riff off that. I think it's a nice approach. I mean, essentially what I was going to do is, right, I was going to look at some of those things anyways, and then kind of use that as a template and then just, see where we tweak it. And so if we think cluster, we think there's value in it, sure. If not, then, we can use it anyways, and it could just become a new section, right? It could just look similar to cluster, but be something different. So I think that's a nice approach, a nice way to look at it.
And then option C is row houses or other densification. It's all in the same place, just as zoning, not trying to target specific lots or anything like that. Which kind of taps in nicely to our next topic. I'm just looking at the time. So let's kind of wrap up this one, maybe for today, unless people have burning other thoughts. Sounds like we're on pretty good agreement that we want to get something in shape a little more quickly than we have in the past to bring to planning board and then hopefully to council to see what comes back, because it will come back, right? I think, Bruce, what you've provided is a great framework starting place. Yeah.
Okay, good. So perhaps I'll just but I'll look at what I've written, and I'll look at the cluster development section on 48 to page 51 or so, because essentially what's been written has the added component of reducing house size. And the cluster, as I think, I haven't read through closely yet, but my guess is that how this would change in principle would be that it would be a type of cluster development that allows for more lots than would otherwise be in return for reduced house size. And as Fred points out, we would bear in mind the fact, I guess, that an ADU as a protected use would find its way or could find its way or should be enabled in a way to find its way onto any of these small lots in some way or other. So that probably means that we could be quite small houses could be required, recognizing that an ADU of 900 square feet could be added to any one of those lots. So I think that's
I don't remember well enough. There's no lot size on the ADU lot?
No, there isn't any.
It could be 100-foot lot. You still had an ADU.
Yeah, so if the lot is so small, maybe you can't do a detached, right? You might have to attach it or connect.
But that's still by right a lot. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Sorry, as
so Go, Nate.
Oh, Bruce, as you're talking, and you mentioned cluster, I was just thinking, so the cluster is based on a traditional subdivision. So you create a yield plan, right? And what you say is, if you can get 20 units, 20 lots on this property, then you can cluster them, but you don't actually get more lots. You just condense them. And so I don't know if that's the approach we want, or we say you do this yield plan, but then we say you can double the lots.
Exactly.
Or, because the other difference would be you just give us a dimension size, right? You just say you can do this 5,000, 7,500, whatever it is, or we figure out a different way to get to that small lot size. So I guess it's a matter of looking at it.
My guess is that we would need to demonstrate some kind of giving in order to compensate for what Mike considered the taking. So that's why I'm imagining that there needs to be some rather, what's the word, very much in your face, a deliberate methodology which represents a giving on the part of the town that compensates for the restriction on house size. I'll look at that. As you said, you wanted to move on, so let's do that. I didn't want to take.
Okay, next on the list was discussion about main corridors and RVC, BVC zoning. I'll be honest, I don't remember where our conversation ended on this. I think this was partly prompted by, I think, you, Angus, and obviously related to the citizen petition that came through. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I can. So I haven't done anything on it. What I did do is a little bit of work on the my hobby horse, which is the PRPOP stuff. Which is the PRPOP. The idea of folding PRP and OP into commercial would actually relate to the main corridor issue. because a bunch of those zones are on main corridors. So that is something that we could talk about now or later. Depending on what y'all's thoughts are on the PRPOP thing, if I'm moving past that, I sent Nate a bunch of documents like 9 minutes before the meeting started, with track changed alterations to the bylaw, trying to fold the PRP and OP into the commercial district.
Nate, do you have a zoning map handy that we could look at?
Yeah, there are very few of, I mean, we're talking about 3 zones here, and there's probably what, 8 parcels?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say I think at the planning board we are talking about housing and PRP. I think that's something that's on the zoning priorities list, Angus. So I think we can discuss that more. In terms of the corridor zoning, I just want to jump in and say that the town does have a grant to study East Amherst, and staff's trying to work on that and get that going. We'd hire a consultant or a design team, and we haven't really defined the geographic boundary. The purpose is to assess the existing zoning and then recommend ways to increase density, whether it's through a 40R or a state tool, or just through using our zoning as it is, perhaps even combining districts. And so I think that to me, that would be, let's keep that as our main corridor study. It's going to kick off this spring. We're going to have, a year to complete the grant, and I think that we could use that East Amherst as the first go. I think the planning board and the subcommittee here would be involved. I'd like to think that we kind of be the working group of the consultant, if that works out, and so that way we can kind of keep this moving. And I'll find a zoning map. I think there's more commercial. There's commercial, there's some in North Amherst, East Amherst, right? It's around PRP, it's bigger areas. And then there's office park. So combining them, it's not as if they're contiguous in terms of land area. They just, what Angus has done is looked at the use charts, the allowable uses and other things, and they're very similar. And so the question is, could you combine these, make some, carry over some of the uses from the different ones and essentially create one zone, and, that still allows those things. I haven't looked at it, what you sent. I'll forward it to everyone on the subcommittee. So the question is, is that do we want to move that forward? Like I said, or what we might talk about at the planning board is, would we just focus on housing in the PRP or in some of these other districts in a limited fashion? And so, but again, right, there's probably so many ideas here. So let me see if I can pull up a easy to read zoning map.
And I can share a couple of thoughts about it. So the most of the use classifications are not that different. It's like changing special permits to site plan reviews, changing a few no's to site plans reviews. Most of it would be the areas that I think would be thorny, having looked through it, would be there's a bunch of stuff allowed in commercial relating to automotive stuff that might not fit as well with the PRP zones. And that's because there's those auto shops on in the
College Street.
On College Street. So that's the only place that I saw where there could maybe be an issue. And then what I did in going through the bylaw was basically try and move everything to more lax, whichever thing was more allowed for more. Generally, it was commercial that allowed for more. But on a few of the dimensional regulations, I relaxed some things on commercial to match OP and PRP regulations. But Nate, correct me if I'm wrong, or help me understand if I'm hearing, maybe reading between the lines of what you're saying as well. The work that y'all are doing on College Street, it sounds like you're also maybe concerned about the idea of making any kind of changes to the commercial zone while that consulting work is getting started.
Oh, not necessarily. I think right
Okay.
now the limiting factor with commercial is the additional lot area per unit. And we limit,
Mhm.
how many units can be provided in a mixed use building. And so if the uses look similar, it's the conditions within the use chart or in the bylaw that would limit, say, residential development right now. The no, what I was going to say is I think that the consultant is really going to look at East Amherst. Like I said, I'm not sure where, right? I think generically we said anywhere it could be from like Hamshaw lumber down to, I'll say Stanley Street, but it could, I think we're going to focus and not be that broad, but within that there's commercial, it's a main corridor, there's RVC, there's whatever, BVC possibly. And so I think that was, because to me, that's like our main corridor study. So I don't think we need to, spend a lot of time right now thinking about how we rezone for main corridors, because I think this East Amherst study is going to do that.
Gotcha.
And in terms of a zoning map, what we have, I can share my screen. It's not very,
It's not critical right now. If we're not going.
it is not, it's hard to read. So I can
Yeah,
manipulate
that's
some.
the
It is
problem.
really hard to read.
Always have a very difficult time figuring out what we're talking about sometimes with this.
I mean, I'll just say, like, I think it was Bruce, I can't remember if you said that it was just a few parcels. I mean, it is pretty small. The commercial has there's the one right above where they were doing the North Amherst overlay. That's a big chunk of commercial. Right above that is PRP.
Right. That's the only one I know about.
Yeah, there's commercial down for the lumber yard south of Amherst College. That's literally a single property that's zoned commercial. There's commercial on College Street, then there's PRP down off of Old Belchertown Road. Then there's Office Park. The only Office Park I've been able to find is maybe even covered by the University Drive overlay. And it's on the east side of University Drive. And it's like where the hospital complex is and a couple of other properties. So to me, my goal is to try and simplify the zoning code where and how we can. And so what I was trying to do was basically anything that could be done currently in the OP and PRP would basically still be allowed. A whole bunch of additional things would be allowed. And then my goal was opening up housing in both commercial, OP, and PRP. And so in the dimensional regulations changes, or excuse me, the use changes that I made, it was to open up apartments, townhouses, maybe mixed use buildings, definitely.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone was around when those were defined. The goal was, I assume, to encourage different types of development.
It was a concern that the tax base in Amherst, it followed the expansion of conservation land and so forth, and people started noticing that less than half of the town was taxable in one way or another,
Right.
and we had an expanding university at that point, or it had expanded. It had been expanding for 20 years, and the thought was, we really should provide opportunities for business. We can get the benefits of that onto the tax rolls and so forth. And so in the 90s, these things were carved out, in the few places that were remainingly available, I
Right.
think. And so now we're kind of 30 years on almost, and nothing much has happened. So I would have, in the first time I was on the planning board, would have perhaps been rather vociferously challenging the proposition that these should include housing. I'd say, what the hell are you thinking of? You're nuts. This is this microscopic part of town that we've made possible for industrial or whatever, the development, and you're thinking of shooting yourself in the foot. How could you be so stupid? 30 years of nothing happening on those sites has probably mellowed my indignation. So I'm just sitting here and saying nothing. But that's my history associated with, and there's probably a lot of people's who've been around for a while.
Yeah. And was it, I mean, the housing was not allowed, I'm assuming out of concern that it would just become more student housing.
Well, not student housing. No, it was the housing was not allowed because the higher and better use was perceived to be commercial
For
development.
tax base. Yeah, I see.
That and securing the tax base, that's what it was all about, I think. That was and student housing hadn't registered terribly much at that point. No, it was preserving and enhancing and expanding the tax base. That was the golden goose that was seen to be attracted to those parcels. But no gooses come.
We need to change them to designate Amazon warehouse or AI server farm only. Then one can start tax base.
The hope
Okay.
was that incubator startups from UMass would,
Yeah.
and it was said that the Amherst address, having Amherst in your address, had value, had cachet, and so we should try and create the opportunity for people to, for that value to be added, so to speak.
Yeah.
All this stuff. That was the kind of general conversation. I think
Sure.
Fred might want to either
Yeah,
say he
Fred,
agrees
go
with
ahead.
me or challenge. It would be good to know whether I'm inventing all of this or whether it's shared by in some way.
Yeah, I too was on the planning board at roughly the same time that Bruce was, and
Exactly the
that
same
was
time.
absolutely the case. And I remember that development that was proposed for Sunderland Road, and the developer was going to pay to extend the sewer all the way out. That was an example, and well, town meeting shot that down, but still, that was the tenor of discussion in both the planning board and the finance committee.
Thanks.
Okay.
So I mean, yeah, it sounds like no reason not to address that. Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's just, like I said, staff is kind of looking at how to allow housing, maybe in the PRP or in Angus if it's combined. I think there is a concern that if we allowed it, then that might be what gets built. And maybe there's still a possibility that, who knows, right? In the next few years, something could have a spinoff from UMass or some other business may come there. And so some of the discussions are like, well, would you, I don't want to say overlay again, but would housing be allowed in just only certain areas within these districts or something? Just, I think the market is so heavily weighted to housing that I don't want to preclude so say we said, okay, let's allow housing in the commercial, and all of a sudden we get a frenzy of building. But then someone comes and says, oh, I'd like to do this. And we're like, oh, we've actually built out a really good commercial part of town. I think it's let's just keep talking about it. So, what I've thought about with, if we want to change PRP or whatever housing is, I think we need to, right, we have to lift the cap on apartments. We have to change our mixed use. If we're going to have mixed use buildings, the 30% seems to be, a lot of people seem like it's a high hurdle. So do we change that percentage or change our mixed use building? How do we still allow for the possibility of other uses that are allowed in those districts that are not residential? And so
you said a lot of people think 30% is high. Are you saying a lot of developers?
Yeah. So, more recently we've had developers and property owners come and say they've looked into trying to do mixed use buildings, not in downtown, right? So outlying village centers, other places. And they've just said that the 30% is difficult in terms of finding tenants. And so essentially, right, the units will subsidize the commercial space,
right,
which is okay to an extent, except that it seems like, there isn't a strong market then to fill those spaces. I don't know, how
totally
much.
Agree. But I interpret that, and I'm not a developer, but I interpret that maybe too facetiously as it's hard to find tenants to bring as much money as apartments would. And so, I mean, I don't know the finances. My reaction to that is, do we really want to let developers tell us what we should zone when they have a much different agenda, right?
Well, I think in the PRP in those areas, I guess what gives me pause right now is what we say can be allowed in mixed use buildings as part of the non-residential space is really kind of like your typical retail commercial.
Yeah,
But maybe in these areas we could allow like manufacturing uses, right? Like a fab lab
yeah,
can be clean now, right? And so you could have like an innovation lab,
sure.
which wouldn't be allowed in a mixed use building, but maybe in these areas we'd want it to be because it's really not producing, hazardous waste or noxious
Right.
fumes like maybe we thought it would 30 years ago. And so I would just say that if we were going to do that, we would want to look at kind of maybe tweaking the mixed use building
Like
standards
to
in
allow
some
those
way.
things.
That's all,
Yeah. Do you mean to allow those types of things?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
oh, totally for that. I mean, I was thinking, great, in the PRP, let's make 100% commercial on the first floor, 100% mixed. I mean, increase that to still encourage that and allow the tax base to grow, because those bases get more, right? We have a split tax system, right?
We don't.
Oh, I thought commercial was different than residential. Tax wise, it's not?
I don't believe so.
Oh,
They're wrong.
okay. Well, my recollection is I'll just stay quiet.
But I think, so I think, Ingus, let's talk. 'Cause I think, at the planning board next week, we might hear some like, oh, what do we do with the PRP? It is an interesting conversation, but like, yeah, to your point, Jesse, if we wanted to allow housing, is there a way to preserve and maybe encourage space for other uses that other than your traditional retail? Like, do we,
So I guess I'm just trying to understand. I mean, so potentially we could, it hasn't happened yet, generally speaking. The land is also very difficult to build larger things on because it's like all wetland, almost. So I mean, Nate, are you the way I was approaching it was we'd leave as many options open as possible so that if someone wanted to do something, they could. But by opening up more options for housing, that could lead to infill, which could then necessarily, even though other things are allowed, block off other uses of the space. But it seems like the only way to stop that is not to allow housing. So, and then we're potentially stuck with the same nothing happening. So I guess I'm wanting to get a sense, Nate, like what are you suggesting exactly?
yeah, I don't know yet. I think just, I think some of it would be, like Bruce said, there was a purpose to these zones, right? There's a purpose in the bylaw, and there was a whole, an expectation of how it could be developed.
Yeah.
And maybe it hasn't been used that way, but I just don't want to, for instance, if we said we can allow apartments any size up to, we don't cap the number of units and we allow them by site plan review in the PRP, we might get a lot of proposals for apartments in the PRP for the developable land that's left.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's okay. Or the problem might be is that we then just, we precluded any opportunity for, say, some type of other office space or other type of, manufacturing use to go in on that land because now it's apartments. And so, I agree. Maybe we say, well, we've had the zoning in place for a long time and it hasn't been used. So what's the harm? I just want to make sure we kind of understand those implications. That's all.
But if the goal was really about tax base and less about diversity of what we have, that we still accomplish that with apartments, right?
I think it's a really good question. Like, what is economic development or what's growth?
Right.
Is growth?
Right. I mean, if the goal was really to have a diverse business base,
right,
that's one thing. But clearly there's not a lot of interest in that happening here. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just think keep having the conversation. It's something that is on the priority list. It's something ever since we talked about it, Angus, and, you've mentioned it, I've said, yeah, we should investigate this a bit more because,
Sure.
So is the next step then to bring it to the whole planning board to figure out what we are as a group willing to countenance? Or is the next step, Nate, for me to meet with you about the changes that I made to the documents to think through like what I'm missing, what I'm not thinking of? What's our next step here?
On the 21st, I think we're going to have the Housing and Zoning Subcommittee is going to have more time than just the report to actually discuss what we've been talking about, what are, what our ideas, and then to have the whole board discuss them a little bit too, and say, okay, here's what we think are a few priorities we'd like to continue working on, and give the board the opportunity to weigh in a little bit. And then staff has a few zoning ideas. And so then, yeah, so I think we'd bring this back to the board next week and say, okay, here are the things we've looked at, like the subdivision method, North Amherst still, this PRP, COM office park, however we want to kind of frame it. And then, yeah, so I think that's to me, that would be the next step, and see how the whole board looks at it.
Okay. And then once this PRPOP stuff is kind of set to the side, I'm happy to also work on the RVC, BVC stuff, and thinking about if there's a way to either combine those or make changes there to kind of simplify things, since those are, again, these high priority areas that seem to align with the housing production plan priorities of both infill development, but then also thinking about areas where greater density would make more sense because they're on major bus routes or major arterial roads. So,
Okay. Other thoughts before we switch to North Amherst overlay? Okay. Who can summarize where we're at with North Amherst overlay? And
Well, I'll have a shot.
Sure.
I think we are at a point where we know what we want to do, but we recognize that there is a significant headwind. And what I tried to do in the thing that I sent you, which is in rough form, is basically to write an introductory narrative, which, and I think as I said, I'm inclined to try and develop this. And this was your suggestion, Jesse, when we had a drink the other night, which I very much enjoyed in that library of the Boltwood Inn, which is a great place to sit and chat. I think it's worth us, which means I'll put the work in on this, to create a series of probably half a dozen 700-word articles that can ideally be published sequentially in the bulletin, that basically set out the big picture thinking here. And the sequence goes something like, we have a problem in town, and it's a peculiar problem because we're a peculiar town. It has to do with housing students. And so the first step, the first bundle talks about Amherst as a town hosting a large institution in this country, and basically says what other towns are like Amherst, and describes the criteria that we would use to establish a comparable, lists the potential comparables, and recognizes what are the 10 or 15 towns in the country that are most like Amherst. And then the second tile, or the second component, says we talked to the planning directors of each of those 10 or 15 towns, or whatever it is, each of those towns. We asked these kind of questions, and we learned the following. And the following that we learned, which is essentially the essence of the second tier, second piece of this, is that there are three ways in which towns like Amherst have addressed the challenge of providing student housing. And I list the three. And then the third, fourth, and fifth of these articles goes firstly with the solution concept of the university, the institution providing housing on campus, and describes the ways in which that can happen, but concludes with the reality that this is something over which any given town has no power. It only has the power of persuasion. The third one, sorry, the next in the sequence is the minimum distancing solution concept, which is the second solution concept, which we found that towns, and we describe that in some detail, but recognize that it's got two severe challenges, limitations. The first is that it's highly demanding of administrative time and effort. And the second is that a town needs to be a certain size relative to the number of student houses it's trying to contain in order to work in theory. State College has one student house for every 9, essentially. I mean, do it on a frontage basis, but it boils down to about one per 9. So that means if you want to, we've got 9,000 students, let's say that's 2,000 houses. If you want a minimum distance, 2,000 houses, you're going to need 20,000 houses. And that's not who we are. We're not big enough to solve the minimum distancing problem the way State College has. And State College is the only town in the country that has, for any length of time, committed to that. At least that's my understanding. So then we move to solution concept number 3, which is the building off campus, but close to campus, high density, primarily student housing. And then we describe that. And then the final in the sequence basically draws it all together. So it seems that in order for us to be able to successfully, or most successfully, we may not be successful, but the most powerful way in which we can push this is to show the options and to basically make the case that we can't afford not to try to do this, because this seems to be the most obvious option in the face of not being able to persuade the university to. And by the way, that third article mentions and acknowledges that the university has, 60% of its student accommodated on campus, which is pretty good compared to other institutions. It's just not pretty good when you have a unique situation where if you're a university of UMass's size in a town like Amherst, you should be aiming to have 80% of your students on campus, not 60%, because otherwise the town suffers. And I think we should, now maybe that's been made with sledgehammers and all kinds of abusive instruments to the administration of UMass for years and years, and I just don't know it. But maybe it hasn't, and that the case needs to be made that the UMass should do better because of the particular and peculiar situation in which this university and the town is. But in the meantime, we also should look at Plan B or Plan C. I think Plan B, the minimum distancing thing, the second option, really doesn't seem to me to be a feasible solution concept for this town, given the nature of the problem and the scales of the various institutions in the town. Anyway, all of this I want to write out so that, and then the sixth of this would be the cottage style housing thing we talked about, and that we include that because we say, just in case you're wondering why we think this is all about student housing, we don't really. We recognize that it's the major market that we have to satisfy, and we should be not blind to that. But at the same time, we're not ignoring the other needs that we have, because I think we have to show, as we've said before, to ourselves. So the sixth of one of the sequences is that. So it's a fairly comprehensive series of short articles discussing housing in Amherst that hopefully sets a broader context within which we can respectably present and defend the proposition that we should the town should commit to high density off-campus housing in the immediate vicinity of campus, and that the overlay method is we see is the best mechanism for achieving that. So that's where I think we are, and if that's the case, then the ball's very solidly in my court.
Yes and no. I totally, I like this plan a lot. I think that can get started, and I think we could probably try and move an overlay plan along at the same time. Because as we
Oh,
know,
yes.
it'll take weeks until it gets to council. It'll take weeks until it comes back to us. And so, it's a
Right,
multi-month
exactly.
timeline anyway. So I think we move in parallel with trying to move something
Oh,
forward.
very
Certainly
definitely.
full board.
I think we've got the essence of what we're doing. I mean, the mechanics of what we're trying to do are in place.
Yeah.
Nate, we've defined the area. We've defined the mechanics of it and so forth, and design guidelines, design standards. Not to say they can't be improved or changed or modified, but all of that is in. So I think yes, we should create that
So
document.
with the previous conversation in mind about being a little more nimble, bringing things forward, what else do we need to do before we think it's ready to come to full board, hopefully for a vote to then go to council?
Oh, I guess we need to review we need to finalize. I can't. What is that document? Can I find it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can work, just to jump in here, I think I can work with Jesse, you and Bruce, and I think we need to kind of get a general format, document like in zoning format down. So we have a few frameworks, we have, other narratives. I think it would be synthesizing those. Maybe there's a cover memo or document, and then there's actually, kind of a zoning, zoning format, a purpose, maybe, we said if there's definitions, standards, whatever, and we can just kind of put it in that. I think having it in that format is really important. So I think it's kind of getting, taking everything we've done and kind of getting it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was thinking about last week, I was thinking back over the last many months about how some things have played out with full planning board. And I was a little surprised, but there have been more than one occasion where we've brought something forward, and then the response from the other board members is, well, we don't know anything about this. We're not prepared to vote on it. We're not prepared to talk about it. So I don't know how to progress that. I don't know if it means we need to get this on the agenda as soon as possible, just for conversation with the full board.
Yes,
Then
that's
2
should be
weeks
done.
later, a month later, bring an actual document or something like that, so that we don't end up in that same.
Yeah. But that's what you were saying, that we need to advance the regular mechanism of reviewing and submitting this to council, and that can happen while. I mean, I don't know whether the bulletin is going to be happy to do all of this and so forth, but getting what I see is my task, or the task that I would like to try and achieve, is to put this into the to put this forward in a very public way, so that the broader context is
maybe
there.
I'll write to Doug and ask if we can get this on the agenda soon for conversation.
Yeah, Jesse, like I said, I think, Pam and I just talked about this, and I suggested getting the Housing and Zoning Subcommittee as a more substantial agenda item next week. And maybe for future agendas, not so late in the meeting, right, as maybe under the general housing discussion or something, or its own agenda item up front, so that we can actually talk about what the subcommittee's been doing. And so next week, we're going to try that.
Excellent. Okay.
We haven't run it by Doug, but I'd like to just move it that way, just so we do just what you said. We don't expect to vote by the planning board next week. We can say, here are the 2 or 3 things the subcommittee's, has really been focusing on. We can have a document or 2 in the packet for each, and it's just a discussion, right? It's just, I don't want them to, right, no pressure, right? But like, what do you think? Here's our, maybe we put a timeline, we're going to come back in 2 meetings, and we're going to have a draft zoning amendment. The idea is to get the planning board to sponsor it as a zoning amendment to council, right? So that's the goal. And we just kind of work, it doesn't have to happen at 1 meeting. It can happen over a few, but.
That's great. I appreciate that, Nate. That's excellent. Angus, you're going to add in?
Nope. No. Sounds good.
Excellent. And thank you again, Bruce, for doing all that work. I mean, I haven't
done it yet.
Great plan. No, but Well, there's work and thinking.
Well, I thought I would have, but I mean, today's the first day in a week that I felt like I'm not going to go back to bed after this meeting. So there's a hope, hope springs eternal. I'm looks like I might be able to pull this off.
Okay, so maybe that's it for our discussion today on North Amherst. We seem to know what we need to do. Also on our agenda, Nate, you had put a housing production plan conversation. I'm not sure if we need to go into much more detail right now, unless anyone wants to jump in with something. Look like it. We kind of just, well, I don't know that we need to talk about the petition amendments again. I think we're set with that. I don't see anyone in the public. I don't have any unanticipated items. Anything else anyone wants to talk about today?
Nope, we're good. I'm good.
All right, excellent. Nice to see you all. See you in a week or 6 days. Planning board, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, y'all. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Bye.